a new post-Brexit proposal for Northern Ireland. After months of negotiations, the Windsor Agreement aims to right the wrongs of the Northern Ireland Protocol. With London and Brussels' relationship finally appearing on the up, will Northern Ireland's loyalists accept the deal? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the Windsor Framework. This week, a new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland was announced. The Windsor Framework is an effort to revise the controversial Northern Ireland Protocol, which set trade rules between Northern Ireland, a part of Great Britain, and the Republic of Ireland, an EU member state. Now, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen met in Windsor to work out the details, and both agreed it was a big step forward.
I'm really pleased. In fact, I'm over the moon that yesterday we managed to have a decisive breakthrough with our negotiations with the EU, reached agreement, the new Windsor Framework, that I think is an extraordinary positive step for Northern Ireland, and it represents, as the European Union President herself said, a historic moment for us to move forward and resolve some of the difficulties of the past.
Well, before Brexit, trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland was easy. They were both EU members and so shared the same trade rules. When Northern Ireland left the EU, a new deal was required to avoid a hard border on the Emerald Isle. Now, keeping an open border between the two was a key component of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement that brought hard-won peace to the Irish. So when the Northern Ireland Protocol came into effect in 2021, a de facto border was declared in the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the UK. In order to avoid any hard borders, a new series of problems was created with the Northern Ireland Protocol. Here's a look.
Under the protocol, Northern Ireland stays within the EU's single market for goods. Inspections and paperwork are conducted at the Northern Ireland ports instead of the Irish border, and apply even if the goods are staying in Northern Ireland. But the complex regulations and checks have caused delays at the border, increased the cost for businesses, and led to food and medicine shortages.
One consignment can have 80, 90 pages of documentation just to move it across the Irish Sea. The bureaucracy that's involved in it and the errors that can happen across those 90 pages have resulted in that product being held in Belfast and returned to Great Britain because the paperwork's wrong. Nothing wrong with the product, one error in the paperwork.
On Monday, the EU and the UK agreed on a revised deal called the Windsor Framework to tackle these problems. The agreement creates two lanes for goods entering Northern Ireland. The green lane is for products bound for Northern Ireland. The framework eliminates most of the custom bureaucracy for those goods. And the red lane is for goods going to Ireland and the EU. These products will be subject to usual EU procedures. The framework also introduces a system called the Stormont Break. It gives the Northern Ireland Assembly the right to challenge the new EU laws applied in its territory. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak struck the deal with the EU and will likely face little resistance in Parliament. But it's unclear if the Democratic Unionist Party, which is Northern Ireland's largest union party, will accept it. On Monday, DUP leader Jeffrey Donaldson said, "In broad terms, it is clear that significant progress has been secured across a number of areas, whilst also recognising there remain key issues of concern." The party's rejection of the previous protocol led to a political deadlock in the Northern Ireland Assembly. Sunak may yet pass the deal in Westminster without unionist support, but such a move could further destabilise Northern Ireland.
So, is this the deal Northern Ireland's been waiting for? And does it really solve one of the biggest Brexit hurdles? Joining me now to debate that and more are, from Norwich, David Campbell Bannerman. He's chairman of the Freedom Association and a former Conservative MEP. From Birmingham, Femi Oluwole. He is co-founder of the pro-European Union advocacy group Our Future, Our Choice. And from London, Denis MacShane, former Europe minister and author of Brexiternity, The Uncertain Fate of Britain. Thanks all so much for being with us. Femi, let me start with you, a Brexit skeptic. Are you impressed now? Was Rishi Sunak able to do what Boris Johnson never could?
It's definitely a deal that wasn't really available to Boris Johnson. I think a large part of that will be the less confrontational approach that Rishi Sunak has taken, and also the knowledge that the Tories are not going to be in power for very long, and when Labour comes in, they plan to essentially seek almost full alignment with EU rules. So the risk of those border issues is significantly reduced long term. As for should we be thanking Rishi Sunak, I often refer to that idea as if somebody chops off your leg, do you thank them for sewing up the wound? No, you're still left significantly damaged. Northern Ireland is in a worse position now than they were before Brexit. There were no border issues before. Now they have to deal with red lanes, green lanes. They have the consent mechanism every 4 years, the potential Stormont break, lots and lots of issues added to an already extremely turbulent political environment over there. So this is not something we should be thanking him for.
Yeah, you have a cynical take really on the so-called improvement we've been witnessing, or that some say at least we've been witnessing, between the Tory and the EU leaders. You kind of think the EU is being nice because you think the Tories will get voted out anyway. But I mean, to what end? Why kind of sugar up that relationship in the first place?
Well, it is in the EU's interest to have better trade with the UK. Everybody's been very clear on that. Obviously, Brexit hurts the UK more than it hurts the EU, but knowing that there is going to be that Labour government in future, knowing that you are going to have more alignment on rules, and therefore the threat of the issues in Northern Ireland is reduced, it's in the EU's interest to try and find a way forward. And because Rishi Sunak has taken a more gentle approach, that is now more likely. In fact, the insane thing we saw 2 days ago was Rishi Sunak going on TV and talking about how Northern Ireland is the most exciting economic zone on the planet, precisely because it has full access to the EU and UK markets, you know, like the rest of the UK had before Brexit. It is insane that you have the leader of the Conservatives who are leading Brexit saying that being in the EU market is a massive advantage to the economy.
Okay, Denis, let me turn to you only because I saw you shaking your head. What confounded you there?
Femi, who I greatly admire, I think counting your election eggs before they're in the ballot box is a big mistake. I've forgotten how many times I stood for Parliament, winning and losing, and I would just go cool on the assumption it's all in the bag. Early triumphalism kills politics. Broadly, I agree with him. I think undoubtedly it's a big feather in Sunak's cap, and I'm very struck at how it's the end of the Boris Johnson era. We've had 7 years in which Brexit swallowed up British politicians, swallowed David Cameron, Theresa May, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, spat them out into shredded pieces. We had Corbyn doing the same for Labour. And now you have a sense that adults are back in the room with Rishi Sunak on one side, Keir Starmer on the other. But there's still a lot of problems to be solved because, as Femi rightly says, this is good for Northern Ireland. It doesn't add a single new export to mainland Britain. It doesn't allow any young British person to travel, work, be an artist in Europe. All those problems remain to be solved. It was reported this week that in 10 years' time, Poland would be richer than Britain, because Poland, even with a very conservative government, is taking maximum advantage of the European Union, and we're sulking in our little isolationist corner, and we seem not to want to make money with anybody these days.
Okay, David, I can see you disagree, but Denis, I mean, first, because it was alluded to, the fact that a lot of the last, few days of press coverage we've seen have been kind of exposing the fact that Boris Johnson really, this is none of what he promised, that oven-ready deal he kept talking about and that he claimed to have. None of it was ever true. So it really exposed how poorly he managed Brexit and made Rishi Sunak look, like you said, the adults in the room.
That's broadly right. Boris Johnson found a mid-rank diplomat. His highest post, I think, was ambassador to Denmark, a lovely country. I love Denmark, but not a Foreign Office challenge. And sent this man who had no experience of trade negotiations, and he had no idea what he was doing, and delivered a very, very poor deal, which people in Northern Ireland, on all sides of the province, absolutely shredded. Now we've got rid of that. We're now honouring the treaty again, though Rishi Sunak has to ditch the Northern Ireland Protocol bill in front of the Commons. That has to go. That allows Joe Biden, who said he wouldn't come to Britain to celebrate the Good Friday Agreement's 25th anniversary if London was still playing with Boris's stupid hard Brexit. So it's a step forward, but honestly, it was crazy. And it's worth repeating the point Femi made. A day or two ago, there was Rishi in Northern Ireland saying, it's a wonderful deal. You can export to all of Europe. You can export to all of mainland Britain. Rishi, I know you only came back to Britain from California a few years ago. That is what we had for 30 or 40 years before. Let's get back to trading with Europe.
Okay, David, let me get to you. I mean, we're hearing Denis list a number of problems that are still to be solved. I mean, one of the primary issues now also is getting this through the DUP and reestablishing the Northern Ireland Assembly. Is that a minor issue? Will that happen? And then do you think the rest of these problems will be solved via this Windsor Framework?
I'm afraid I don't. I mean, I do welcome it. I think it goes in the right direction. You know, it will reduce the number of checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. You have these green lanes, you have red lanes for goods going into the Republic of Ireland. It loosens tax implications such as VAT. VAT and excise duty, so that's welcome. But the problem is we're still stuck with EU rules in Northern Ireland, and that will mean we will diverge quite a bit from Northern Ireland over time. They've had 300 laws from the EU since Brexit. And, you know, Boris Johnson, by the way, has just made a major speech just as we came on and has said that what they're after is to keep, you know, through Northern Ireland, to keep the whole of the UK as close as possible to the EU so we don't diverge. He calls it a drag anchor on the United Kingdom, the whole of the United Kingdom, because, you know, we want to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, which is massive. It's going to be bigger than the EU. We want to do a deal with India as well, where we don't want to be held back by having to be tied into EU rules, which are often very expensive and bureaucratic.
David, let me ask you this, though. You say the UK will diverge from Northern Ireland over time, but I just have to ask how much Britons actually care at this point. Is it a big issue for them?
Yeah, I think it affects them in many ways. I mean, the job opportunities of major trade deals, like, you know, being able to trade all around the world, well, particularly with the Asia region, which is where all the growth is going to be in the future, rather than Europe. I mean, that is a major benefit. And India, I know I worked on the EU-India trade deal for 10 years, and EU hasn't done one. If the UK gets there first, that's great. We both need to do it. But, you know, you're talking about 150 whiskey and cars like Jaguars, ironically, going into India. That's a major trade deal, and that will help the whole of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, and also things like free ports, which are low tax areas where you can bring in goods from around the world, work in them and export them, re-export them. I mean, that can create thousands of jobs, and Northern Ireland should benefit from that. And the EU is cracking down on that. They don't really have the same notion as us on free ports.
Femi and Denis, I can see you despair. Femi, go ahead.
Yeah, according to the government's latest figures, the benefit that we've got from the new trade deals we've done with other countries around the world since leaving the EU is 178 times less than what we've lost into our GDP because of the loss in trade with the EU. So the idea that we can make up for trade, make up for the damage of Brexit by making trade with countries on the other side of the planet is economically illiterate.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
it's not.
I'll tell you what, though. Let's get back on the Northern Ireland track and this Windsor Agreement, because we're getting into another Brexit. Was Brexit the right thing to do debate? Denis, if I can turn to you about potential pitfalls of the Windsor rules themselves. I've heard a little bit of concern that there is actually space for some exploitation, you know, be it maybe criminal or otherwise, of these new rules, this green lane, the red lane, the VAT exemptions. And how much will it cost to police this properly? Is that a legitimate concern or something you think is on the margins?
I think the biggest concern, everybody, particularly the farming community, we import half our food that we eat in the UK, is that so far Brexit Britain hasn't imposed a single control on food coming into Britain. That's okay if it's a giant lorry from a single big producer, but lots and lots of little smaller producers group their packages, their pallets, containers into one lorry. And you only need a bit of dodgy meat, dodgy pork, the swine flu that is a huge problem, and we could face a major health crisis. But this is because the government will not actually impose proper controls. Why? Because that would see queues going from Dover to London. We've got food shortages anyway, rationing. It's like Second World War rationing in our supermarkets because of problems partly to do with Brexit, not all to do with Brexit, but no other European country faces these food shortages. And I think the other problem in Northern Ireland, very simply, is that it's going to be tricky. This is the end of the road for the Democratic Unionist Party in many ways. Will they bite on the bullet and go back into power sharing, which was always part of the Good Friday Agreement, but that means accepting a Sinn Féin, that's a Catholic nationalist identity, first minister. And that is the end of 100 years, more than 100 years, of ultra unionist identity in Northern Ireland. That's very tricky. I think Rishi Sunak's out of his depth on that one. But overall, what you're picking up from all the MPs is they're really not interested in following Boris Johnson any longer down that fanatical anti-European road. He's like Donald Trump. He wants to come back. He aches and groans, pants to replace Rishi Sunak. The Tory party, many hard Brexit ministers are now with Sunak, and they're saying to Boris Johnson, go off and write your books, go off and have your fun, go off and have your girlfriends and everything, but stop trying to pretend you're a serious politician any longer.
David, you're not convinced.
I'm not convinced. I think Boris Johnson could well be back, and pretty soon, actually. I'm sorry. I know that's bad news for you because he stood up for Brexit. He was very important to actually winning the Brexit debate. I think it's outrageous. You say about standards, food standards. Well, BSE was caused by animals eating other animals, or, the food stuff was other animals, and the EU is just in the process of legalizing that again. So I'm sorry, I don't take any lectures on high standards from the EU. It's not legal in Britain, quite rightly. No, I think when it comes to Northern Ireland, I think this deal will help. I assume it will go ahead, but Boris will not vote for it. Boris Johnson will not vote for it. It wouldn't have been happening if it wasn't for his bill, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which frightened the EU. The Financial Times was reporting it was like a loaded gun, is what an EU diplomat said, on the table, a loaded gun on the table. And so that bill has been very powerful, and it's forced some concessions. But I think the game plan with Northern Ireland has always been, and I was involved, by the way, in the peace process, 96, 97. I was special advisor. I was standing behind John Bruton and John Major when it started in the peace talks. So I'm very, very pro the Good Friday Agreement. But it's been put at risk by EU meddling.
Okay, Denis, I know you disagree, but David, I have to stick with you because there are still concerns, and since you know the history here is better than anyone, I think, on this panel, really, are these concerns exaggerated that this could actually result in descending back into the violence that we saw, before the Good Friday Agreement was finally reached?
Yes, well, I had to deal, when I was involved in the peace talks, I had to deal with loyalist terrorists who were all convicted. They'd been, they were signed up to the peace process and peace. And that was part of the difficult process, who you spoke to. I am worried that the loyalists are very angry. And if we don't get this right, there could be a return to violence. And there have been threats along that road. I mean, you don't want to be, obviously, bending to threats of violence. But having said that, you have to be very sensitive to it. And I think the DUP, it's not just the DUP, I'm not saying they're anything to do with violence, by the way, but they keep in check certain more extreme loyalist elements who may wish to return to violence. So don't just bash the DUP. If they say this isn't good enough, it is because they're worried about the consequences, the wider consequences.
But I mean, let me ask Denis, or Femi even about that. I mean, if the DUP seems to have this control somehow or influence over these extremist elements, I mean, should they be bowing to such extremist elements if they're going to threaten violence? Because I refuse to believe that that's in any way a majority consensus from members of the loyalist parties in Northern Ireland.
Well, as a BBC reporter, I was in Northern Ireland.
Hold on, Femi, go ahead, and then Denis.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
I've got to push back against the idea that it's the DUP that are somehow pushing back against the anger of loyalists. It's the DUP the reason why we're in this. In 2017, it was the DUP that supported Theresa May, that gave her working majority in Parliament, which is the reason why Brexit survived until 2019. If it wasn't for the DUP, then there wouldn't be the border in the Irish Sea right now. Loyalists would be in a significantly easier position with the full access to the UK market than they are now. They are the ones who've done the most damage to unionism ever. So the reason why those loyalists are so angry right now is precisely because of the actions of the DUP by supporting Brexit. In fact, we saw a loyalist attack on a bus where they firebombed a bus, I think it was a year and a half ago. And the reason they did that, well, the reason they said they were doing that was in anger against the protocol, a protocol which was part of Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. The DUP are responsible for this.
Denis, go ahead.
Well, very simply, I first went as a BBC reporter to Northern Ireland, a long time ago, and I come from an Irish family, so I've been tracking it too. I think the people of Northern Ireland are sick and tired of being jerked around by a small number of politicians, one or two of the DUP, one DUP MP called the Good Friday Agreement a capitulation. Can you imagine that kind of language? And every security boss, the head of MI6, the Irish security people, the police chiefs, the chief constables, all say you don't bring back the hard border in Ireland, which will be necessary to meet the DUP wish of an absolute full-scale rupture with the Republic of Ireland. That's been a problem for them. I mean, I accept that. And Boris Johnson negotiated a terrible deal. I accept that. I hope he's apologised this morning, David, for the ghastly deal he brought back to Britain, and especially Northern Ireland. The Sunak deal is imperfect, but it solves a good number of problems. It parks Boris Johnson with all Nigel Farage and all the other more extreme anti-European isolationists out there writing their memoirs endlessly. But we can now move on in quite a significant way.
Didn't respect democracy, and that includes Femi. You didn't respect the democratic vote, and the Remainers in Parliament caused absolute chaos. And Theresa May gave us a terrible deal, and Boris had to make the best of it. And, you know, attacking Lord Frost personally, I think is a disgrace, Denis. You know, you went to jail for 6 months. You know, let's not be personal about this.
What did you say? What did you say? What did you say?
Did you go to jail
You're a liar.
for 6 months?
What did you say?
It's in your wiki entry.
No, no, you're lying. That is untrue. Withdraw that allegation. I was in jail for 6 months at once. You never dare say it on a British programme or the BBC, because people here know the truth. David, you are shameless and shameful.
But I'm just saying...
Wrong again. Just get your facts right before you can insult me. I've been put in prison in communist Poland, and this has nothing to do with the debate at all. It shows just how weak you are.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm saying the deal was very bad. Boris made the best of it, and we can go further.
His deal.
And sort it forever. And there's a lot of benefits of Brexit, and it was down to people like you that do not respect democracy. And the EU is not democratic, as I'm sure the will find out.
Sorry. All right.
Go ahead,
if we're going
Femi.
to go on the whole respect democracy thing, the whole reason why we're in this situation is because the DUP refused to go into government. Who are the DUP? They're a unionist party in Northern Ireland who represent a significant part of the 52%. They opposed Boris Johnson's deal in 2019. So Brexit happened in the full knowledge that the 52% who justified Brexit weren't all on board with it. So the idea that this is respecting democracy is a joke, and it's been proven to be a joke for a very long time, ever since 2019, when even Nigel Farage said that if given a choice between Boris Johnson's deal and staying in the EU, the people of the UK would, quote, vote to remain and vote to remain every single time.
Well, I mean,
the idea that you are the ones respecting democracy is a joke.
A career out of opposing Brexit. I mean, it's time to respect democracy.
So, another ad hominem. Man. Another ad hominem. You did an ad hominem on Dennis and then an ad hominem on me. Just attack the person if you can't
well
take the
done,
argument.
David.
Great strategy.
David, you're good at insults, bad at truth.
Sorry, Dennis, you're I'd be very careful about that, as Wiki will testify. Wikipedia.
Wikipedia, okay, I'm sorry. Gentlemen, I was going to let you just run out the clock there, but we really do have to end, unfortunately, this edition of the Newsmakers. A lot more to discuss, and I'm sure I'm going to see you back on our screens relatively soon to talk further about this issue. But for now, that is all the time we have, so I'd like to thank our viewers for being with us as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.